Hello and welcome back to Aetheral Space 10.4. We see you, Mr. Muzazi, and the Procession of the King of Babel.
That sounds more like a prog rock album name than a fucking chapter title. It's like some shit King Crimson would put out. Alright. You ready?
Yeah. What happened last time to Muzazi? Did he have a nice time at the party, do you think?
He was really sad and alone, and everyone's being all... I relate to Muzazi, you know? Maybe it's autism or what, but like that idea of like not really getting all the fucking little social conventions and like bullshit like groups and dramas and cliques, and like I feel for him a lot. I feel like that a lot. I don't get it.
It was like that meme where he's like at the party, he's like, they don't know.
But the part of Muzazi that I don't have to deal with is no one's ever tried to assassinate me that I know of. And Muzazi also had to deal with that, which was very sad.
In the bathroom, no less.
Yeah. Muzazi in the bathroom. Oh, wait.
And I didn't realise, they also tried to shoot him in the back when they did it.
Oh my god, he's like, Dragon?
He's like, he's here. He like runs up, I was like, we need to get out of here.
You don't understand, there's a cogitus.
He's coming!
Oh, I have to show you Michael in the bathroom after this, hang on. Okay. 16 days before Avaman's attack. Someone had tried to kill him, but who? Those thoughts filled Muzazi's mind as he looked down from the stands of the training area, watching the Supreme Heir training with Morgan Noct. Noct's style of swordsmanship was much different from Muzazi's, all leaping about and constantly moving, taking advantage of his greater agility. That sounds fucking exhausting. Movements that Muzazi would have needed thrusters to pull off, Noct was able to perform naturally. He drummed his fingers alongside the sheathed luminescence which lay on his lap. Of course, he'd considered the possibility that Noct was the one who tried to kill him. The younger man had threatened him on the first day here, after all. But, no matter how hard he considered the issue, Muzazi couldn't fathom a motive for him to do so. Bitterness over an interrupted sparring match generally did not escalate to murder. The method of assassination had clearly been premeditated, too. Arrows fired through the ventilation system, targeted at a specific room. It was something that would have required a good deal of time to set up. Shortly before the attack, Muzazi had seen Noct speaking with Wu Ming in the hallways. It was difficult to picture Noct detaching himself from that conversation and making the necessary preparations in such a short amount of time. So, reluctantly, Noct was crossed off the list. Muzazi's eyes drifted over to Edward Grace, who was watching the bout from the other side of the stands. He, too, was definitely to be removed from the list of subjects. He had been by the Supreme Heir's side all night long as her personal bodyguard. Him not being there for any period of time would have been such an event that Muzazi would surely have heard about it. The Supreme Heir herself, needless to say, obviously didn't do it either. Mariana Panhelios could easily have slipped away from the party, though, with how quiet she was, and judging from the incident in the hallway, she seemed to have something against him. He didn't know what, exactly, but she was certainly a suspect. Why aren't you expecting Gretchen? She's the one who makes the fucking Aether items. Thinking about it more, he'd never heard of the silent sword using a bow and arrow, but it was entirely possible that the weapon had been an Aether armament. Yes, an Aether armament, which brought Gretchen Hale into the suspect list as well. There we go. It would have been exceedingly simple for her to create a projectile weapon like that, giving the arrows the ability to track their target and fire it through the vents. She'd been with the Seven Blades for years now. She'd be familiar with the Child Garden's layout. Still, Muzazi didn't want to believe that the one who'd been kind enough to bring luminescence back to him would do such a thing. She'd clearly invested effort into him becoming one of the Seven Blades, so why would she want to invalidate that effort by killing him? The same went for Balte Kojiro. He'd gone to an exceptional amount of effort to locate Muzazi and summon him here. That could have been for the purposes of the murder... That could have been for the purposes of the murder, but why go through all that trouble? He'd never met Balte before in his life. Why would the leader of the Seven Blades want him dead? Because you have fucking Negan inside of you. Ioneer Yggdrasil. Apparently he wasn't suitable for polite company, so he'd been nesting in the bowels of the ship during the reception. That left him without an alibi, but he also had no motive. Muzazi hadn't so much as spoken to the fell beast since he'd arrived. Or, of course, it could have been any of the guests who had come for the welcome reception. Counting them, the suspect list lengthened considerably. Muzazi cursed himself for not looking at the arrow when it had disappeared. Even just the color of the Aether would have been a vital clue. All this suspicion was exhausting. It was hard to believe, but Muzazi found himself actually missing the I was just about... Alright, Tan, this is insane. Before that sentence, I was literally just about to say he should call up Winston Grace. Like, he should talk to Edward and have him help out. Oh my god. Insane breed on Tanhoney. It was hard to believe, but Muzazi found himself actually missing the presence of the detective Winston Grace. He'd probably be able to solve a case like this with ease. "Mind if I sit here?" asked Balte Kojiro. Muzazi looked up as the leader of the Seven Blades took a seat next to him, looking down at the fight in the arena. The Supreme Heir was soaked with sweat, panting for breath, but still doing her best to overcome her opponent. The Toy Muzazi found perseverance like that more admirable than anything. "It's a shame, isn't it?" Balte mused, hand on his chin as he looked down at the two clashing fighters. "What is?" Muzazi asked. "Effort that won't be rewarded. Aklama can dance around Morgan all day, but the gap between their abilities is simply too great. She won't land a hit on him, I guarantee it. Is that your precognition?" "No," Balte sighed, "but it's true. Without Aether, an ordinary human can only do so much. Look, she's exhausted. Morgan's barely broken a sweat. He can keep going, she can't. Even if you forget the difference in strength and agility, their endurance is leagues apart, and in nearly every battle, the one who can't tough it out to the end is the loser." "But surely her perseverance counts for something," Muzazi said. "Her strength of character, if nothing else." Sure, Balte conceded. "But if perseverance was her Aether core, she'd have unlocked it a long time ago. I suppose it's our fault as her teachers," he sighed. "But still, it's a shame. We must be awful people to treat a child like this." Muzazi raised his eyebrows, surprised by Balte's candor. "She lives with every one of her needs met, with the protection and tutelage..."
Sorry, yeah, you're absolutely right. That should have been out of hand.
"Protection and tutelage of some of the strongest individuals in the Supremacy. She's hardly being mistreated." A sad smile crossed Balte's lips as he turned his blue gaze to Muzazi. "Tell me something, Atoy." "What?" "If the Supreme Heir came up here right now and told me she was tired of all this, that she didn't want to be Supreme Heir anymore, that she wanted to go and live her own life, do you think I would let her?" Muzazi did not say anything, but they both knew the answer. Balte's eyes returned to the field. "At some point, for all of us," he continued, "a choice is made. The things we've done, or the things done to us, it doesn't matter. Once that happens, once that choice is made, we're locked into it. We're stuck on that one fixed path to the end of it all. That's it. None of us can escape." I don't think that's true. I disagree with your philosophy, Balte."
Take
The
that!
words settled like... The words settled like black snow. How does black snow settle?
Ominously.
It's what I thought. Fuck you. That sentence has no meaning.
Sounds
This was
cool,
a melancholy... Sure. You better make black snow a thing. You better start thinking of your fun fact about black snow.
Say fun fact upcoming.
Yeah. This was a melancholy side of Balte Kojiro that Muzazi had not seen before. Indeed, as he looked down at the Supreme Heir in the arena, it almost looked as though he were glaring. Was Balte trying to tell him something here? Should Muzazi confide in him regarding the assassination attempt? Time held Muzazi's tongue for him, as Balte leaned back in his seat, dark effect fading away. "Anyway," he said, voice bright, "there's something I wanted to let you know about. You remember the Pretender Supreme Heir?" "Of course," Muzazi hurriedly nodded. That whole ordeal and the fates of the special officers involved had been raging at the back of Muzazi's mind since he'd first heard about it. Balte's eyes flicked this way and that, checking for unwelcome listeners before returning to Muzazi. "We have information," he said quietly. "An anonymous tip regarding where Hans Alier will show up. The Kingmaker's next target, in short." I wouldn't trust that info. I wouldn't trust that. It's too easy. "Anonymous?" Muzazi frowned. "Is that reliable?" He's just like me, for real.
I'm actually just stealing your thoughts.
We're just the same person, that's all. "I've done a check of the location they mention, and it seems to match the Kingmaker's modus operandi. An isolated Supremacy installation, a broadcast relay in this case. Not so different from the Special Officer rest station they hit last time. Slightly better manned, but the same principle applies." "So," Muzazi mused, "there's a traitor within their group, then? Someone feeding us information? For what purpose?" "I don't know." Balte crossed his arms, "and I dislike not knowing these things, but we can't simply ignore this. Every second those criminals run free is an insult to the Seven Blades." Quite a difference from last night, when he'd been so fixated on Muzazi's welcome reception. Perhaps it was like the Ascendant General had said. Even if one dislikes the dance of politics, they cannot escape it. Maybe Balte held the same sentiments as Muzazi and simply could not act upon them. "Do we intercept them?" he asked, voice low. Balte sucked in air through his teeth. "We must go after them while we have their location," he said slowly. But the Seven Blades have other obligations that must be met. A military parade on Terminus requires the presence of the Supreme Heir. Taking the Child Garden on an interception mission would not be practical with that in mind. So we wait? Muzazi asked indignantly. No, Balte shook his head. The Seven Blades are an institution, but we are also individuals. Some of us will accompany the heir, while the others respond to this provocation. He glanced at Muzazi. Needless to say, you'll be part of the response team for Hiram, the planet that's being targeted. Muzazi kept his own eyes on the match below, where the heir finally seemed to have admitted defeat. She had collapsed on the floor, limbs splayed out, her chest heaving for breath. She'd done well all the same. He nodded and spoke quietly, so that the heir couldn't hear. I feel like that fight's foreshadowing something. What are you foreshadowing, Tan?
Who knows?
God, my fucking throat hurts today. Who else? Aetheral Yggdrasil. He's a reliable sword, Balte said. I figured out who the fodder that's going to die instantly is going to be on this mission. Tanoni, please, Balte said. A powerhouse, and with his shape-shifting he can fill in many different roles, depending on what the situation demands. He'll follow your orders to the letter, don't worry. Just my orders? Muzazi furrowed his brow. I've placed you in command of the operation, so yes, Balte nodded. If the other member has a problem... What? Oh, is he talking about, Ioneer?
Well, perhaps he will elaborate.
Oh, I know who the other member is. If the other member has a problem with that, he'll just have to deal with it. Muzazi didn't quite understand why, but his heart dropped deep. The other member? You know exactly why. Because you know Edward Grace doesn't leave the Supreme's side, so the only other he would be fucking Morgan. Balte nodded down to the arena, and Muzazi dutiful...
Sorry,
dutiful?
Yeah, sorry, I was like, I completely
Doodly.
lost... Doodly. It's like, why is it accepting it? Why does it say red? That's a word.
And Muzazi dutifully followed his gaze, to where Morgan Noct was grinning back at him. So, was that his thing?
No, it's more like this. He's more sort of like...
So...
Well, he's a little bit he's a little bit spicy.
So, Morgan said, stashing his bag into the available locker. Boys' night out, huh? Exciting stuff. The excursion crew had assembled in the Rhapsody, Morgan's ship, to make the preparations for their departure. Muzazi had chosen to travel light, with little, but his luminescence and a change of clothes for the way back. But Morgan had clearly gone overboard. This was the third bag he'd brought aboard, and this was his ship anyway, so surely he must have had some possessions aboard the vessel already. Muzazi rubbed his temple, ready for a tiresome journey, when Aetheral Yggdrasil caught his eye. The fell beast had situated himself right at the back of the ship, where there was a free space for cargo, and transformed. The humanoid shape had been abandoned entirely, replaced by a wooden sphere of wrapped branches and vines. Thin vines latched onto the floor of the ship, too, presumably to stop Ioneer from rolling around during the journey. Aw, seatbelt. He was even less anthropomorphic than he was usually. Even the square indentation that served as a rudimentary face had vanished completely. It was difficult for Muzazi to even comprehend the fact that he was looking at a thinking being. When Morgan got no reply, he followed Muzazi's gaze and nodded knowingly. Ioneer caught your eye, huh? He's in hibernation mode right now. Saving energy for the battle ahead, I'd guess. Trees don't hibernate, Tan.
Fell beasts are like trees, not necessarily are trees one-to-one.
Okay. Oh, Muzazi said. He's asleep? Yep. Out like a... Muzazi drew luminescence in a flash, thrusters boosting the movement to its utmost, to such a degree that Morgan could not even blink before the sword was right in his face. The tip was pressed against his nose, and as Muzazi held the sword straight, a single drop of blood swam down its surface and dripped to the floor. Morgan did not move. He just stared at the sword making contact with him. That was a wise decision. If he tried anything, it would be easy for Muzazi to thrust the sword forward and run his skull through. Skulking around and scrounging for information was not how a toy Muzazi did things. If he believed he had an enemy, he confronted them. Didn't he just confirm that this guy couldn't have done it because he was with fucking what's-his-face?
Well, he said he probably couldn't do it, but he also thinks he's already an enemy because he misinterpreted on the first day as like, you better watch your back.
Yeah. Did you try to kill me? Muzazi asked, voice cold. When? Morgan asked slowly, hands in the air, clearly trying not to aggravate. When? Did he try to kill me one time and not another? Muzazi narrowed his eyes. Last night, at the reception. Did you fire arrows through the ventilation system, aimed at me while I was in the bathroom? Morgan raised an eyebrow. Why would I do that? Answer the question, please. Muzazi pressed luminescence in just a little bit further so Morgan could feel it. The first watery drop of blood was joined by a second. No. No, Morgan said. No, I didn't. Muzazi looked long and hard into the face of the other special officer. He was no cogitant, able to tell when someone was lying at a glance, but in this sort of situation there was no way that Morgan wouldn't betray a tell. Sweat slowly dripped down Morgan's forehead, but there was no flinch, no twitch, no movement that betrayed deceit. Slowly, Muzazi retracted his sword, but he did not sheath it. "I believe you," he said gruffly. Morgan let out a sigh of relief, visibly deflating for a moment before recovering himself. "Someone tried to kill you?" he asked, voice full of confusion. "Using arrows? In the bathroom?" Muzazi nodded, still keeping a safe distance from the younger man. 3 arrows fired from another room on the child garden. Is this a technique you are familiar with?" With a shake of his head, Morgan replied, "No, none of the 7 blades have an ability like that as far as I know." "Well, I guess it could have been one of the guests, or... Gretchen?" Morgan ventured, face pale. "She could have made a bow and arrow aether armament with an ability like that." Muzazi had considered that, of course, but he was doubtful. "Blacksmith as she is, Gretchen Hale is still a swordswoman. Do you know if she has experience using a bow like that?" "It wouldn't matter. It's part of her ability, Ragnarok Forge. She can encode memories into the weapons that she makes. So long as it's near the user, they can wield it like an expert." So Gretchen certainly could have been the one who attacked him. So does that mean she'd need to be near, like, an archer to get those abilities?
Like, she'd have to get the memories from somewhere. Like, she would have to, like, have at least a basic
steal
understanding
them to
of
use
it.
later.
Yeah, to, like, put it, then she can put the memory into the weapon. So as long as she was holding the weapon, she would have knowledge on how to use it, basically.
Okay. So Gretchen certainly could have been the one who attacked him, but that didn't answer the question of why. He'd sensed no murderous intent from her on any occasion. What reason would she have to take his life? No. Muzazi felt like he was on the wrong train of thought entirely. He was broken out of his reverie, though, by Morgan's grave words. "They'll try again, you know." For the first time his face was deadly serious. Even the sly smirk that seemed a constant decoration was gone. Muzazi looked up. "What?" All levity had vanished from Morgan's stance as he took a step to the side, hand resting on his sheathed saber. "You're not the first blade they've tried to kill. Your predecessor, Gustavo, someone stabbed him in the back." Muzazi frowned. He'd suspected something untoward had happened to the blade he'd replaced, but to have it actually confirmed was another thing entirely. Still, was Morgan someone whose word he could trust? Well, he could decide whether he trusted it or not once he'd heard it. "Tell me more." "I will," promised Morgan, "once we're out of here." His eyes flicked around, and Muzazi understood immediately. Once he did, his shiver ran down his spine at just how careless he had been. The Child Garden was one of the most important installations in the Supremacy, for propaganda, if nothing else. The surveillance aboard such a starship would be beyond nearly anywhere else. Right now there were thousands of eyes and ears on them. Outside of the garden, for a very short time, they could for the first time speak freely. Wait, for a very short while. Okay. Popcorn.
Hans Allier stepped through the undergrowth of the jungle, feeling the humid air moisten his skin. He took a lick of his sweaty arm as he emerged from the woods, appreciating the tang of humanity that landed upon his tongue. That flavour was the very proof that he was alive. Sick.
There are other proofs of being alive than licking your sweat.
There's no
weirdo.
proof. The tang of humanity. You have to taste it.
Okay, Bruno.
Nin joined him a second later, her practised feet barely making any noise as she walked. She was good stuff, good product, trained well. Hans had known bad product, knew bad product, and he could see the difference between dogs who barked and bit. He'd known from the moment he'd seen Nin that he'd get good use out of her. Victor, on the other hand. The thug broke out of the jungle with much less grace than his companions, using his hatchet to hack his way through vines and branches. His face was covered in scratches from where the trees had bit at him, and his clothes were darkened with sweat. Hans wondered what that tasted like. Hans was satisfied with the mysterious sponsor for breaking out of the fridge, but he'd wished to be more discerning with the others. Nin was great, but all Victor was good for was brute force and running his mouth. Not quite bad product, but very nearly. His eyes slid over to the site directly in front of them at the bottom of the mountain. The Supremacy Broadcast Relay, carrying news and entertainment from the borders all the way back to the homeland. There are thousands of these installations all across the Supremacy, but for their next move, the public announcement of the true heir, they'd just need the one. Hans smiled to himself. He'd never once doubted that he'd escaped that prison. That was because he was the only person that was truly real, and by all rights the universe was organised in a way that would ultimately benefit him. Any event, no matter how seemingly disastrous, was designed by his servant God with him in mind. His eyes clouded over as he used his ability, scanning the box-shaped building nestled in the jungle below. Thick walls, too thick to blast through without using their armaments, no windows, limited external ventilation, air circulate with internal stock, oxygen purchased from Tyler & Sons LLC, discount for government use, slightly bigger discount than usual to encourage repeat customers, 7 guards, too tired because they were up late last night, armed plasma rifles, no special officers. Easy pickings. Hans' ability was understanding. He could simply glance at a target and gain a wealth of information about its history and abilities. It worked by enhancing the deductive reasoning any human was capable of, and then letting those parts of his mind work automatically. For him, it was like receiving divine wisdom. It suited him. He glanced at his 2 companions, beings who, like everyone else, had been created to entertain him, and smiled. "They're not expecting us," he purred. "But still, I think we should show these cats what we're made of, yeah?" Victor grinned. That was the kind of stimulus he responded to. Without waiting for another word, he held out his hatchets. "Fusion tool," he growled. "Detritus." Grey for shown. Shot even. Nin drew something out from her long sleeve. A garrote, silver wire dangling between 2 handles. She grasped it in both hands, holding the implement out in front of her. "Fusion tool," she giggled. "Odette." Blue Aether blasted. With a sigh of relief, Hans drew his rapier from the scabbard at his crotch. He ran a finger down his surface, savouring the moment of the Aetheral Infernos at his side illuminated him. The only thing that better than having one mysterious sponsor, he reflected, was having 2. Especially
Gretchen!
Especially when they offered such toys as this. "Fusion tool," he breathed. "King of Babel."
The fact that they're all fusion tool makes me think they're armaments rather than abilities, and it also makes me think that they can be combined, which is a concept I've been talking to you about for a hot minute. So very excited about that.
We did say what happened last time when Victor used his against the special officers.
Well, he fused with himself, but I thought that was his ability.
Well, perhaps we'll see. He said that, and then he fused with the weapon.
Yeah. So did they all just make the same ability?
Who can say?
That's less cool. All right. So here's a question. What is black snow like?
So black snow is a form of snow that's on the planet Halcyon, home of Halcyon Interstellar, sort of the main planet, the headquarters. So black snow was a product of pollution because Halcyon was originally the site of their first mining operation, and at that point the technology to mine these sort of minerals that you're after was not quite perfected. It releases large amounts of contaminants into the atmosphere, resulting in a poisonous black snow effect.
So what does it mean to settle like black snow?
Settle ominously, basically.
Yeah, because like the coming of black snow meant, people are going to get sick or hurt.
Yeah, they're going to die. It's very poisonous.
Yeah. Interesting. So it's kind of like acid rain.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you guys for watching. I'm glad you named a planet Halcyon.
Not Halcyon International, sorry. Halcyon Interstellar.
It reminds me of our campaign. Little Village Halcyon. All right. Well, we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.